Welcome to Data Skeptic All About Surveys, our season about survey design, interpretation, and methodology. Let your voice be heard at survey.dataskeptic.com. If you start reading up on surveys, you're going to eventually encounter the word longitudinal. In the context of surveys, it means that survey has been going on over time. The same survey, or it often evolves the essence of the same survey, when conducted periodically and for a long enough amount of time, can be an incredibly valuable measurement tool to see what trends are going on and how things are changing. Today's interview is going to focus on one such study, the Panel Study of Income Dynamics, or the PSID. I first became aware of this study when I encountered a paper our guest today wrote, which focused on food insecurity. That is one of many metrics that we have good data about thanks to the PSID. When it started, what it is, and why it exists. We'll get into all those details coming up right now.
My name is Noura Insolera. I am a research investigator with the Panel Study of Income Dynamics at the Survey Research Center at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. So we have a lot of acronyms here. So I am at the PSID, at the SRC, at ISR, at U of M.
Very nice. Well, let's break down the PSID first. What can you tell us about it?
So the PSID is the Panel Study of Income Dynamics. It's the longest running longitudinal panel household survey. We've been following the same families since 1968. We knocked on doors in 1968. It came out of Eisenhower's War on Poverty. And there was a study called the Survey of Economic Opportunity, which is essentially looking for families that were sort of vacillating around the poverty line. And they were trying to figure out who was staying in poverty and who was getting out of it and why. Why were these families different? And it was supposed to be a 5-year study. They kind of passed it over to the Survey Research Center, which was relatively new at that time. Jim Morgan, who was here at the time, and actually ended up working here well into his 90s. He said, I'll take that project on, but I also want to add in a cross-section of the United States. So instead of just having these families who were kind of vacillating around the poverty line, he's like, I want to look at kind of a comparison group of a good cross-section of the U.S. And so he did that. And so the main study sort of had these two samples, about 5,000 families and about 18,000 individuals in that first year. And we've been following them and their kids and their kids and their kids since then. So we've collected data annually until 1997 and biennially, so every other year since then. And we are now about to launch actually in March of 2023. We have some families up to 7 generations.
Wow.
The last wave, we had about 25,000 individuals. So it's growing over time, as families do. And so we get a lot of information from them.
Can you share a few details about what the experience is for one of the participating families?
In the beginning, it was knocking on doors. Interviewers would sit down with the families in their living rooms and ask questions and write them down on paper. And then those interviewers would come back with the paper and we would get the information sort of loaded up into an aggregated file. By the 90s, we were doing everything or most things by telephone. And so we have what we call CADI, which is a computer-assisted telephone interviewing. And so things get kind of preloaded in. So instead of saying who's living here and kind of starting from the beginning, we can say, last time we spoke with you, this person was here and this person was here and this is how old they were, and kind of make things a little bit easier on the respondents. But typically now, the interview lasts about 90 minutes. For new, if you have a new spouse or if we have any new samples, so we have, new immigrant refresher samples from time to time. And we're getting all new information on everybody in your family, it can last much longer. But we're very cognizant of respondent burden because we do ask a lot of information about not just income, but health and wealth and well-being and location and things like that can take a lot of time. And just starting in 2021, we started on the web. So some people were very excited about that, while others really just wanted to stick with the phone. And we still do some face-to-face interviews. So every other year, our typical families, they know that they can be expecting our call. We'll be on the phone for a little while.
Well, how did you first become involved with the project?
That is a very interesting question. So I actually was an undergraduate here at the University of Michigan in the econ department. And I had a class that was a seminar with Frank Stafford. And he was the director of the PSID at the time. I had no idea that the Institute for Social Research existed. I thought that econ was just macro and micro and, consumption, budgetary constraints and positive and negative externalities. I didn't know. And I took this course and it was really interesting. And I ended up having an internship in the summer of 2007 and then was hired as a temp. And then I stayed. So I ended up getting my master's at Columbia, used the PSID for my thesis, and I got my PhD from CUNY in sociology and used the PSID for my dissertation. So I kind of continued on and then moved back from New York back to Ann Arbor, and I've been here since. So I kind of have climbed up from being an intern to now a research investigator.
When you think about the PSID as a data set, I guess, what is it? Like if you sent me a zip file that contained it, what would I find inside?
That's pretty funny. At one of our holiday parties, actually, Frank Stafford, the one who I was just talking about, put a zip drive of all of the data in the Secret Santa or White Elephant thing. And it was not welcomed because we all have access to that. So it is a lot of files. I think we have at this point, well over 100,000 variables. But we have this magical thing called the online data center. It depends what you want to look at. If you want to look at families, we have family level indicators. If you want to look at individuals, we also have supplements for children and young adults. So it really depends on the unit of analysis of who you want to be looking at. So that's kind of the place to start, is the who. Then you'd be able to look and see the what. So what do we have available and when do we have this information available for these individuals? So if you want to look at income and you want to look at a family, you can start in 1968 and go forward from there. If you want to look at children in cognition, you could probably start in 1997 with our child development supplement. And, then you can see sort of when that was collected. But yes, so we have an online data center where you can select the variables that you want and then download a specific customized data set that comes with its own code book that's just the variables that you chose. I would not recommend downloading every single variable, though some people do. They like to have them all. They like them to be available for them whenever they might need them. And whenever a new data set comes out, a new data file comes out, they add it to their library and they just, they keep chugging. I tend to recommend, the more curated option.
Yeah. Well, for a researcher who wants to take that path and maybe download some selected variables that could be relevant to their own research, what's available? Do they need a special permission or can they just show up and download?
So you have to be a registered data user, but that really doesn't take a lot. So we do ask for you to fill out our page that says who you are and, the institution that you're coming from, and that you agree to our conditions of use, which essentially says that you're not going to share the data with anyone who is not also a registered data user. You won't post it on a public forum and you won't try to find the people who are in the study, among other things. I can't say that I'm going to be able to read off the entire conditions of use.
Sure.
You will have a login and you'll be able to log in. It is free of charge. We have a myriad of different, software programs that you'll download your data and have sort of the read-in statements for the different software programs and things like that. It's pretty user-friendly. You could download 5 variables into Microsoft Excel, or you could download thousands of variables into Stata or SAS. It's sort of a choose your own adventure, depending on what you'd like to do. But we do have some data files that are restricted. So we have information that's down to census block. We also have some information that could be potentially identifying in other ways, like car make and model, vehicle make and model, participant death files, things like that could be potentially identifying or sensitive in nature. And for those, you have to actually go into a restricted data enclave. And so there is a cost and a little bit more contract that you have to go in through your institution with the University of Michigan. So there's a little bit further steps that you have to go in to gain access to those data. But that's for pretty obvious reasons. And so if you want to do that, you get in touch with us and we'll take you through that process too.
The length the study has been going on for is one of its particular novelties, and in my mind, that opens it up for an unlimited amount of questions that could be asked. There could be some researcher who has some novel idea you've never thought of, and maybe they can get their answer through the data set. Do you have any opportunity to see what the breadth of questions are? What are the areas people are, looking at the data set and trying to draw inference from?
So we do our very best. Part of the conditions of use is to tell us when you publish so that we can kind of get that information. Certainly not everybody does, but we do our best through the library here to search for publications for people that are using the data. Another online resource that we have through the website is our online bibliography. What you can do before you start, downloading variables is to look there. So you can search by author or journal, which can kind of give you like a discipline-specific way of searching, or search by keyword to see the different types of analysis or papers that have been published using the data. That'll kind of give you an idea of what's been done in the past. So you can search by year as well. So it could be that a study's been done on a topic that you're interested in, but it was done in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's time to revisit that idea and to see what's been going on, decades later. So that's usually a really good place to start. And we look at things like peer-reviewed publications, dissertations that have been done, a handful of reports, but we typically look at peer-reviewed publications. And there are over 7,200 right now, I think, in the current bibliography that's online right now.
If saving more and spending less is one of your top goals for 2023, why are you still paying insane amounts of money every month for your phone bill? Switching to Mint Mobile is the easiest way to save this year. As the first company to sell premium wireless services online only, Mint Mobile lets you order from your home and save a ton, with phone plans starting at just $15 a month. At that price point, that is an outstanding extra phone for a developer for testing stuff. We've been messing around with some SMS stuff, and I think this would be a great way for me to set up some test lines at a very affordable price. On top of that, I should hit up Linda about switching over. I'm sure we could save some money here. If you're looking for extra savings this year, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. By going online only and eliminating the traditional costs of retail, Mint Mobile passes significant savings on to you. Unlimited talk and text, high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and switch easily in minutes with eSIM. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month, and to get the plan shipped to your door for free, that's mintmobile.com/dataskeptic, where you can cut your wireless bill to $15 a month. mintmobile.com/dataskeptic. Well, a lot about the world has changed since 1968, and I assume the project has to evolve around it. Can you share any thoughts on, things that have been introduced that are new or needed to evolve with the times? What's different about it than it was in the beginning?
Yes. So this is the struggle with being the world's oldest, right? Is that you want to stay consistent so that you can do these comparisons over time, but you have to grow, right? And innovate, but not have a 4-hour long in survey instrument, right? So there are some things that we ask in a way that may seem old school. In the beginning, we asked a lot about farming, right? Because we had a lot of farmers.
Sure.
That's not to be flippant. We really did. And then, we have a lot more now about some of the new content we have now is about gig work. That's something that maybe would have been called something different or just wasn't in the same sort of, it wasn't called the same thing, right? These are sort of new terms. Some things are a little bit easier. So for example, the census, occupation, and industry codes. Those get updated from time to time in a very official way. And so we update with that. So when the census updates their codes, we update our codes. They have a crosswalk that allows people to switch from the 70 codes to the 80 codes to the 90 codes. And so you can do the same using our data. So there are some that are kind of straightforward that way. And then there are others that we need to add time in. So I think one really good example is sort of the technological changes, right? So we used to ask things like, do you have a telephone in your home? Then we asked if you had a computer in your home. Do you have a smartphone? Do your kids have tablets? Do you have a tablet? Do you have internet in your home? some things just broaden, right? So we just have to ask more because it is still valid to ask, do you have a telephone in your home? Because now landlines are becoming a little obsolete, right? Yeah. So more people don't have a telephone in their home, which becomes a little tricky when you are a telephone interview, right? So we've actually had some issues getting in touch with our respondents when you don't have a landline and you're trying to connect with a household. These sort of technological changes aren't just, they're bidirectional sometimes. Part of the innovations are to make sure that we don't lose some of the continuity over time, but that we're able to make sure that we're keeping up with things. And a lot of that has to do with children and young adults, but equally so with the adults in working ages and retirement as well.
So I'm not an expert in genealogy, but it seems to me, based on the trend you described, starting with, I think it was 68 families, and now it's in the thousands, if you keep this up, you're going to eventually have the entire population in your panel. How do you think about the evolution of that panel? Are there rules for who to include or exclude? How does it all evolve?
So starting with about 5,000 families, you do get a pretty amazing amount of people who are related. But the thing that is different is that those 5,000 families were sample members. Those people who were in the original 5,000 families are what we call gened sample members. So you say genealogy. The people who then, after 1968, marry in do not have the PSID sample gene. So if they leave, we don't actually follow them. We couldn't, by those sample following rules, get everybody in the United States. There are a specific set of rules, and it's tricky. The reasoning there is that really specific set of sampling probability from back in 1968, and then again in 1997 when we did an immigrant refresher sample, and again in 2017 with an additional immigrant refresher sample. Those sampling probabilities said, as of this date and time, these are the people that we want to know about to get a nationally representative sample of the United States. And so people who marry into the sample, if there is a marital dissolution or any sort of cohabitation dissolution, those people are not followed. But the children of those people will get the gene and we will follow them. So actually the sampleness does only kind of follow. It does follow by blood or by adoption. So it does grow, certainly, quite exponentially over time. Mm-hmm. We have had to make cuts due to budgetary constraints. I don't know, I hope that we won't have to anytime soon, but that remains to be seen.
Well, you'd mentioned, I think it goes as deep as 7 generations. Are there any often touted statistics or insights that we can say about how American families evolve generation to generation?
So I think there are a few families that are that kind of, we say prolific, but really some of the families started at 3 generations. So when we knocked on the door, there was a multi-generational family living there, mm-hmm. right? So it was a grandparent, parent, and grandchild already. And so it wasn't that they've had 7 generations that, naturally occurred in this period of time necessarily. Yeah, so you actually, at this point, as of 2019, which is the latest data that have been released in full, we actually can look at individuals to their great-grandparents. There's enough sample in the thousands, or over 1,000, I should say, where you can do some analysis looking at a great-grandparent to a great-grandchild. There have been more analyses certainly looking at grandparent to grandchild analysis, of course, even more looking at parent to child, right? So grandparental wealth on grandchild education, for example, certainly parent to child, especially looking at the child development supplement. So looking at not only when the children are adults themselves, so adult children, but looking at child outcomes from cognitive to health, well-being, even more recently looking at adverse childhood experiences. So things that are reported by adults about their childhood experiences and sort of seeing how that looks in the long term. Mm. Those are not my particular areas of research, but these have been shown to have, or the absence of them having positive results and the presence of them having cumulative negative effects over time.
Well, as we've talked about, many ways we could explore the data set. The one in particular I was hoping we could do a deep dive on was trends and observations in food insecurity.
Yes.
Maybe to kick off, what is a qualification? What makes a person considered food insecure?
Typically, the sort of gold standard definition that we typically go by comes from the United States Department of Agriculture. Having access to healthy food and the ability to have balanced nutrition. It's the access as well as, so it's access and ability. This has sort of ramifications just for everyday life. So there has been a sort of, again, a gold standard module in survey research, which is sometimes used also, at least some of the questions in the clinical setting where patients are asked sort of in doctor's offices or in other kind of clinical settings where they're asked a couple of questions if they have enough food to eat or do they ever worry that they might run out and not have the resources to get more food or adequate food. And so this is sort of the type of food insecurity that we're concerned about. And then there's more severe type of food insecurity, which used to be called insecurity with hunger. And so it's not just having like a balanced diet or adequate food, but it's actually where people are having an inadequate amount of food where either they or members of their family are going without any type of food and are hungry. There are different levels of this scale where throughout the questionnaire, they're asked questions that essentially get more severe in nature as the questionnaire module continues, where we first ask, are you able to purchase the food that you need? And then gets down to, are you skipping meals? Are you skipping meals to give the food to your children if there are children in the household? And then, how often does this happen? And so the severity sort of the level of severity is captured to then kind of aggregate up to these scale scores where we can kind of see if a household is going to have high food security, marginal food security, where maybe they don't always have the adequate food that they need, or if they have low or very low food security, where they actually are experiencing hunger in their household.
And just to ballpark it, because I'd like to sort of know the base rate. I wish it was zero, obviously. It's sort of a shame that in 2023, there are people with food insecurity, but is it 1%, 10%? What's the general expectation?
So in 2019, which is sort of where we're at right now, in order to kind of compare with the PSID estimates with the latest data that we have, it's about 10.5% of the population in the United States, or 13.7 million households. So it is a pretty large group of individuals, and that's based on the current population survey, which is a cross-sectional group of, where I say we have about 10,000 families, they're asking a much larger section of the population of the United States.
A similar thing about the longitudinal analysis, I would like to believe that this is monotonically decreasing, that we're approaching zero. What are the actual trends you see?
As you can imagine, when you look at things like the Great Recession that we somewhat recently just went through, or things like COVID, where unemployment rates rise and people are having harder times accessing things, we see it increase and decrease right over time. But during the most recent sort of exogenous shock of COVID, we saw first this really stark increase, as could be expected, where people were not allowed to leave their homes. There's sort of this very obvious shock of shelves being bare, and people who maybe have the resources to obtain food are not able to, for reasons that are not normally barriers. But then we also saw individuals who perhaps were not previously eligible for public assistance or other types of assistance, who then were able to. So we saw lots of schools, the USDA also, for example, and community engagement that were giving away food, who had these resources that no longer had these constraints through SNAP and food stamps that just had these resources and had a lot of the guidelines that were lifted or loosened that were able to just give away food. And so we're still kind of working on parsing that out as to how much of that was ameliorating the impact of food insecurity and how much of that was people were home and, they were able to get more creative. And so maybe they would have been food insecure had they been commuting to work and spending the money on gas, but everyone was stuck. And so we're still trying to work through all of those different variables that were occurring at that time. But generally, we actually saw that the trends stayed pretty stable. But what we did see is that families where there were children, there was an increase in food insecurity. And I think a lot of that was due to the fact that kids were not in school. We saw that kids who typically had breakfast and lunch at school were now in a virtual format and were not able necessarily to be eating those meals there and were reliant on all meals at home all the time.
Very interesting, yeah. Well, through the survey, you've got many demographic data points, age, gender, ethnicity. Are there any of those that you think are worth highlighting that tell the story a little differently or highlight aspects of it?
In looking at a few different kind of points, one piece that is something that we're still sort of looking into is college students. We have the Transition into Adulthood supplement that looks at the age range of 18 to 28-year-olds. So it's a really interesting subsample of individuals who are splitting off and sort of leaving the nest or typically leaving the nest and might be leaving for a while and then coming back home. And so we're sort of looking at kids who are in this age range and are in college. There have been a lot of studies that are sort of campus specific. The rates of food insecurity are much higher for these kids who are sort of on their own, but haven't necessarily established their own permanent, household yet. So they're away from home for a certain period of time and may really be struggling. But when looking at their parents, it seems like they're very well off and doing great. And so we are actually looking at potentially trying to parse out a little bit more on how do these college students differ depending on if they are commuting from, still living in their natal homes versus living on a campus versus fully independent from their natal homes and actually living on their own, completely economically independent and attending school that way. So we're kind of working on a project that way to see how does food insecurity, not just, lower incomes, but how does food insecurity really impact time to graduation, whether or not they graduate, type of degree attained, and things like that.
Well, you'd mentioned a few of the challenges around COVID. I think, if your data set was a tree and we sliced it down the middle and looked at the rings, COVID is definitely going to be one of the years where a forestry person would say, something happened here. Are there other anomalies that are historical events that are very prominent in the data set as well?
So some of the things that have really had an impact, or we've been able to have an impact, the welfare reform in the 90s. So we were able to kind of be right in the center of that, just based on the timing of when our data were collected. We were able to act quickly and add questions in about the government shutdown that occurred in late 2018, early 2019. So we added those questions in to the 2019 instrument. So for 2021, in reference to COVID, we asked about stimulus payments. We asked about the impact on work. We asked the impact on schooling for children. We asked about illness, vaccination, testing. And then in 2023, we continued a lot of those questions to sort of see, boosters, vaccination, again, if they've had illnesses. We've asked some questions in our supplements, for example, the child development supplement about masking. And then also we have some questions that we're, sort of looking into. Again, like you said, for the innovation pieces, some things we kind of have to do a little bit on the fly, depending on how policy changes in the moment.
Well, I try to keep the show pretty apolitical, but regardless of your party, I think we would all agree food insecurity is a bad thing. And if policies can make it go down, we should do that. And a data set like this can really inform those types of actions. Can you share any thoughts on what that process is like, how you can inform political action and legislative decision-making in a data-driven fashion?
Yeah, so I think that's sort of where we wear kind of different hats. So again, I work for the PSID, but the analysis and the papers that I write based on the data are not on behalf of the PSID. I've done some of this research funded with cooperative agreements with the USDA and with some funding from the University of Kentucky Center for Poverty Research. And they've had some initiatives to sort of look into food insecurity and sort of various different ways in which we can sort of see connections between public safety net programs like SNAP and WIC, and again, looking at trends over time and sort of what helps and which sort of sections of the population are most affected. And so the data-driven pieces here are that, we at the PSID are not doing the analysis for anyone. There are many pieces of research that could give sort of very opposite answers for very similar questions. So it depends really on how the data are looked at. And one of the things that we make sure that we do is we give everybody all of the data that we have. And so if we impute a variable, we tell you how we impute it, and we give you the raw data that was used to impute a variable. And if we generate anything, we tell you how we generated it and why. So if we have age, we give you the month of birth and the year of birth and how we generated age. There is no real hand waving, on our end. However, we do like to give a clean data product. And so the, initial, way that the data come in, especially now that we're a multi-mode study coming from, the web and coming from, the CADDI, the telephone study. If we gave anybody in the public those files, they would be very impossible to use. And so there is a fair amount of data cleaning that just needs to happen in order for these files to be usable. But there aren't really any decisions that we make that would, kind of skew the data in any way. And that's been really important here. And so for the title of your show, the data skeptic, that's one thing, you could be skeptical of my results. And I think that would be fair and fine. But that's something that I've been really, really prideful of this study the whole time that I've been here, is that I really, truly believe that we give you it all, and then you can kind of use what we have to kind of come to your own conclusions. And I've also run the user help desk here for many years. And so I can really attest to the fact that we get people who are from many different disciplines and who are researching many different things. And we give the best answers that we can. And typically it's a very unfulfilling answer, which is that is really up to the analyst to decide and, how you'd like to deal with that. And if you want to impute, just please let us, tell the journal the way that you did it and just be as transparent as possible, because we really want people to know, how you use the data. And that's kind of how we see it. So
what can you tell us about the future of the study? So
we have a very busy year ahead. In March, this month of 2023, we'll be launching the next wave of the PSID. So we'll be in the field. And then coming this fall of 2023, we will be starting the 2023 wave of the Child Development Supplement and also the Transition into Adulthood Supplement. So the two major supplements for children and young adults. And then this spring, we will have the final release of the 2021 data. So it's a busy year for everyone who works here.
Exciting times. And where can we point listeners to go online if they want to learn more?
Follow the PSID on Twitter at UMPSID. And then our website, which is psid.org. That is that magical website where you can find all of the information and actually register to be a data user and download data.
And anywhere listeners can follow you yourself.
I'm on Twitter at Insolera.
Sounds good. We'll have links to all of the above in the show notes so people can follow up. Well, Noura, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and tell us about your work.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.